Hello and welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Loesch. It is a new decade, but clearly the Democrat Party intends to play the same game with Black Americans. And that game goes something like this. You talk up past grievances against Black Americans, you talk down to Black Americans, and finally you tell them more failed Democrat policies. That's the answer to all of their problems. And then rinse and repeat. It's really all I think Democrats have offered Black voters for 60 years. And for 60 years, despite the disastrous outcomes for Black citizens, Democrats keep managing somehow, well, I think actually until 2020, keeping the majority of the Black vote. Now, Tuesday, Biden followed that same playbook perfectly. He showed up in Tulsa. Now, again, this is step one in this playbook. You talk about past grievances, which absolutely some have been underrepresented in history. But it's important to remember that the Tulsa massacre, which occurred 100 years ago in Oklahoma, Tulsa was a growing city. Black Americans were thriving. And you even heard the phrase Black Wall Street. That's what it was called. And there were many Black Americans. They were CPAs, lawyers, doctors. An incident in an elevator between a Black man and a white woman set off a racial confrontation, which grew into a mob. And that white mob left 200 Black Americans dead. Now, we should not forget this appalling chapter in American history. And we should also not forget that the Democrat-backed KKK was mainly responsible. In 1921, Tulsa was a Democrat and KKK stronghold. But Democrats, like President Biden, for instance, never like to mention inconvenient facts like this. They like to forget the history, namely when they talk up grievances against Black Americans. They forget to mention that they, and historically, have almost always been the perpetrators. The Democrat Party has been on the wrong side of history for a long time. They were the party of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, the party that didn't want women to vote. Yes, the party of the KKK who fueled the Tulsa massacre. But since Democrats have not met yet a fact that they could not ignore, President Biden moved on to the second play in this playbook. And that, of course, is to talk down to Black voters. And I think that's exactly what the president did here, for which he received a lot of criticism. Watch.
Young Black entrepreneurs are just as capable of succeeding given the chance as white entrepreneurs are. But they don't have lawyers, they don't have accountants, but they have great ideas.
There were Black CPAs and lawyers practicing in Tulsa 100 years ago. But President Biden says that Black Americans can't even get a CPA or lawyer to work with them today. Who do you think handles all of my business affairs? I have a Black attorney that I have relied upon for years. I mean, I can't believe we even have to categorize it like this. Oh, and just so the president knows, Black Americans are just as capable as white Americans, and that's why Republicans don't treat them like children. And it's why we don't talk down to the Black community and say things like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. Well, like the president said. But this is all entirely predictable from the Democrat Party. It's like having a parent who tells you day after day that you can't make it, so they'll do everything for you. Like a mama bear that never actually teaches their cubs to fish. I mean, Democrats, it's psychological abuse. It's exactly what it is. To talk down to certain voters because of skin color, or to constantly remind minority communities that they can't make it unless the Democrat Party, the very party that caused through policy many of those problems to begin with, comes in to save them. So after talking down to Black citizens, the president moved in for that winning move in the Democrat playbook, which is to tell Black voters that government and more failed Democrat policies are the answer to their problems, which is exactly what they did. The president and the administration, they unveiled their new actions to build Black wealth and narrow the racial wealth gap, a suite of initiatives to fight poverty and racial injustice. Now, again, these are all real problems that Democrats actually did historically create for Black people in the first place. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Once upon a time, Democrats wanted to help Black Americans, so they got behind so-called urban renewal programs. And the idea was that certain neighborhoods were dangerous, and while commuting on freeways to shiny new suburban neighborhoods was the wave of the future. So old neighborhoods were torn down for highways, public housing, and other big government ideas. And of course, these neighborhoods were mainly African-American neighborhoods, historically Black communities. In places like Asheville, North Carolina, Black Americans were forced to sell their homes or have their property seized through eminent domain laws. Now, the intent of urban renewal, of course, was to improve, at least what was said, living conditions for African Americans, but it achieved anything but that. Thousands of black families were relocated, and many others were moved into public housing. And they were told that the situation would only be temporary, as they would have the opportunity to buy land and rebuild property at a cheaper rate. However, neither Asheville nor the state of North Carolina actually made good on those promises. Redlining and discrimination prevented black residents in Asheville from purchasing new homes or obtaining new business loans. And this pattern repeated in numerous cities across America. In fact, urban renewal projects displaced more than 300,000 people between 1955 and 1966, disproportionately affecting people of color, according to a report by the Digital Scholarship Lab at the University of Richmond. And guess who was behind these urban renewal ideas? Democrat President Lyndon B. Johnson. It was all part of his Great Society program, an initiative to fight poverty and racial injustice. Sound familiar? That's because it's exactly the kind of plan that Joe Biden unveiled Tuesday in Tulsa. Among other things, the plan will, quote, take action to address racial discrimination in the housing market, including by launching a first-of-its-kind interagency effort to address inequity in home appraisals and conducting rulemaking to aggressively combat housing discrimination and use the federal government's purchasing power to grow federal contracting with small, disadvantaged businesses by 50%, translating to an additional $100 billion over 5 years and helping more Americans realize their entrepreneurial dreams, end quote. Now, the Democrats say that this all will be done to narrow the racial gap in America between white Americans and black Americans. And again, that Democrat playbook, it always sounds so good and it sounds achievable. But why would anybody believe that this time the outcome would be any different from anything that they've ever proposed or gone through with previously? I mean, the problem with the Democrat playbook when it comes to black America is the fundamental assumption that government is the solution to people's problems. And honestly, this extends beyond black America. If that were true, then why are all the major Democrat-run cities falling apart across America? Like my hometown of St. Louis. I mean, it's not like we don't have the proof. We don't have to guess where Democrat policies lead. We can see them playing out everywhere that we look. In every city where Democrats are in control, you have rising homelessness, drug abuse, crime, decaying public housing, and African Americans are most often the ones paying the price. But again, you have Democrat Party. They've mastered how to play voters and distract black voters and all voters really from disastrous policies that they have by talking up past injustices. Now, listen to the Democrats lately. Listen to their rhetoric. All they do is talk about past injustices, like the Tulsa massacre and slavery, because the last thing that they want any voter to do is to look at the present train wreck in any community, particularly communities hardest hit by some of the policies that I've mentioned. So instead of distracting black citizens with endless talk of white supremacy, the very thing that has defined the Democrat Party from the beginning. Here's more from President Biden Tuesday. Watch.
According to the intelligence community, terrorism from white supremacy is the most lethal threat to the homeland today. Not ISIS, not Al-Qaeda, white supremacists.
I get that if he wants to make amends for what his party has done historically, but in modern era, this is a shameful lie. I mean, if there's a white supremacist party in the United States, it's the same one that it's always been. It's been the Democrat Party, the party of slavery, the anti-woman party, the party that put indigenous Americans on the trail of genocide, the party that opposed giving African Americans the right to vote, the party that condemns black citizens to poverty with policies like urban renewal that have never worked and never will. Yes, the party, by the way, that also used gun control as a way to deny Dred Scott in that famous case in the courthouse that was blocks down the street from where I used to work daily. The Democrats are historically the white supremacy party, the party that talks down to black voters, telling them how to vote, telling them that they aren't capable of bringing an ID on election day. But hey, you have to have one to get a vaccine. Telling them that they don't know how to get on the internet. I mean, just listen to the condescension inside of critical race theory. This is a theory that the Biden administration wants to teach all children. Things like merit is a singularly white idea, or I mean, a number of different issues, success or merit or family. I mean, that's why BLM has like the nuclear family and breaking down the nuclear family as one of their priorities. Any kind of logic and reason somehow are singularly white ideas. I mean, this is just so condescending and anti-intellectual and just, it's offensive and bigoted. It's appalling. and so condescending. I mean, where do we even begin? Black Americans, however, are rejecting the Democrats' negative playbook and embracing optimism and encouragement. We saw this with record GOP turnout in 2020 with minority voters. Now consider this. If Black America were a nation, it would be the 15th richest nation on earth. There are 35,000 Black millionaires, and there's a number of Black billionaires, and those billionaires are almost all American. Black Americans are the nation's cultural leaders, trendsetters, role models for all kids. Now just look at our fashions, language, Black heroes that Americans emulate. We had a Black president. We have a Black female vice president right now. Are we really going to pretend that no progress has been made and that no progress is continuing because of the American system and in spite of horrible Democrat policies directed at all Americans, but specifically Black Americans for 60 plus years? Yes, there's more to do, and there are a lot greater heights of achievement ahead for African Americans, but government is not the answer. It is the problem, the obstacle, as Ronald Reagan said. And finally, why can't Democrats ever talk about how far we've come? Like the Obama family, who reached the pinnacle of power, American royalty who live in the very white Martha's Vineyard in a $12 million home. I mean, what about the progress that America has made? Will they speak to that? Will they speak to the possibilities of America? What about the Biden administration? Will they and Democrats ever celebrate how far all Americans and Black Americans and in general, everybody have come in terms of racial progress? I don't think that that's in the Democrat playbook. So the cycle continues. You see, when it's socialism and bigger government the Democrats want, they can never acknowledge progress in America. Instead, they have to play up past injustices and talk down to voters and then say that the government will fix all of America's problems, especially Black America's problems, the ones that the Democrat Party created in the first place. And that's how the Democrat Party plays voters. There was a great saying from a lawmaker once that, yes, America has its problems, but find one better. Find a country better.